Hello and welcome back to the Motorsport Baithak podcast. I'm your host DD and joining me once again today is my friend and your co-host Vedant. On this episode we'll be talking about the Hungarian GP. So let's grab some chai, take our seats, ready our opinions and dive right into the conversation. What a way to close the first half of the Formula 1 2021 season, Vedant. An epic race. No one saw this coming. I just know what to say. So many heartwarming storylines, coming out of this race weekend. Esteban Ocon winning his first ever Formula 1 GP. Williams scoring their first points after 735 days. And not just points, good points, double points. Both for Nicholas Latifi and George Russell. A total of 6 points, moving them to P8. Not so great for Red Bull, but great recovery drive from Lewis Hamilton. Ferrari having, a roller coaster for a weekend. McLaren not doing that great, but all in all, the championship is closer than ever. It's almost like all the points have been reset, and the rivals still remain just as close to each other. And this next month is going to be the longest month of this year. I just can't. I just can't. Not be racing. Can't not see F1 season the way it has been shaping up so far. And I mean, you can hear me. It's hard to get the words out of my mouth right now. There's so much going on in my head, and I'm still buzzing from the race that just finished about an hour ago. Oh my God, what are your thoughts? Because I know you texted me in the middle of the race. You're like, hey man, I'm starting to feel sleepy here a little bit, and I was like, what on earth are you talking about? But what are your reactions after the race, Vedant?
Well, in my defense, I was feeling sleepy because of not sleeping properly for the past 2 days. But see, in the starting of the season, we said that this can be a competitor to the 2012 season we had in Formula 1, right? The most competitive season in Formula 1 in recent history. Now, of course, we didn't have 7 different winners in the first 7 races, and we probably won't have 7 different winners throughout the season. But the number of storylines coming out of this season in Formula 1, the action, the drama, as you said, the heartwarming stories and everything coming out of this season, only the first half of the season absolutely makes it one of my favorite seasons so far.
Absolutely, and we will definitely be reviewing the first half of the season in a couple of weeks when, we've put everything together, when we're a little more distant from everything that has happened, and we can make a cool and calm, do a cool and calm analysis of what has happened so far. But let's talk about the Hungarian GP. The scenes on the second restart, just one car starting the race from, the grid itself. The entire field was in the pits for the second restart. But let's not jump that far. Let's talk, in a little bit of an order. Let's talk about Mercedes first. Obviously, a lot of headlines coming out of the Mercedes garage, a little bit for the wrong reasons. Definitely a very memeable race for them from the general public, but a great recovery from Lewis Hamilton. But let's talk about Valtteri Bottas first. Qualified well, first front row lockout for Mercedes in a long time.
Yep.
Valtteri Bottas put it in P2 after qualifying. Great stuff from him. Mercedes definitely made a step forward. There were still questions about how good Mercedes would be around a slower medium speed track, but they've come out and showed us that they have the pace to beat Red Bull on any track going forward. However, Valtteri Bottas misjudging that turn 1 under wet conditions and just plowing into Lando Norris, Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez, taking out both Red Bulls, taking out the competition for Mercedes. Obviously, that is the most memeable thing coming out of this weekend. There's a lot going on social media, but you have to feel for Valtteri Bottas and the headspace he will be in now, because obviously he didn't do it on purpose. Everyone wants to score points. No one's crashing into each other, and we're very thankful that everybody came out unscathed from that incident. But what is going on with that guy? Just disappointing, and I just don't know what to expect from him from the rest of the season. Now, I guess Mercedes will be thankful that both the Red Bulls got taken out basically, and they could complete the race. But this could have gone south really fast for Mercedes from a Constructors' Championship point of view this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Valtteri Bottas already is in so much pressure regarding that Mercedes seat for next season, right? and and I mean he's not having his best season so far, and with instances like these, it it will definitely add a lot more pressure and a lot more, you know, self doubt or whatever, you know, mental instability in a sense for Valtteri. But we know he's a strong guy. Obviously, he had a bad start, bad launch, and I guess he just tried to make the best out of turn one and braked a little later than someone would have had, like had he gotten a better launch. But yeah, tricky conditions, taking out Lando and then Max, pretty, yeah. I mean, pretty ugly for turn one incidents.
Absolutely, and the very fact that he took out all of his rivals just made it worse from
Yeah.
like a social
Yeah,
media
I mean,
point of view.
Perez, Lando, and Max. So
Max,
the fight for P3 still remains the fight for P3.
absolutely, no one scored any points
Yeah.
for the fight in the fight for P3. However, for me, after seeing what Bottas did on the race restart, I think that was the last nail in the coffin for me regarding Bottas' seat at Mercedes next year. He might be the best teammate, he might not be Lewis's direct rival, he might be a great team player, but at the end of the day, Mercedes do need someone who can score points every race and not, just every now and then. And Valtteri was that man for Mercedes for the last few years. However, looking at this season and looking at how last season ended and things like that, it doesn't seem like Valtteri can continue in that seat for much longer. Definitely a little bit harsh, but Mercedes is a seven-time world championship winning team, and they want the best in their team and nothing less.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. And I think I mean I texted you that he's not that 2015 Valtteri of from the Williams team anymore, right? In that car, in the Williams, obviously the Williams was successful in those first few years of the turbo hybrid era, and Valtteri was quick, and that's why Mercedes picked him. And then 2017, 2018, 2019, Valtteri was there and thereabouts. He was competing with Lewis himself, beating him at qualifying and races on merit most like some of the times. But as you said, the last 365 days have not been the best Valtteri Bottas we have seen in Formula 1. And I mean, races like today, and last season we had the Turkish Grand Prix, and
I mean, even Imola, at the very beginning of this year, just
exactly.
went to show how
tricky.
how much Valtteri Bottas struggles, in the wet conditions, especially when he's in the middle of the pack. We saw that last year in Monza, and in a couple more races when he got stuck in the middle of the pack and he couldn't make places up. So yeah, that just goes to show that Valtteri doesn't really have the beans anymore to stay in that Mercedes seat and make progress.
Absolutely. And looking at George Russell's interviews on Thursday, when Will Buxton and all these people were grilling him about that seat, George was grinning and grinning hard. So I think he knows something. So yeah, it's just a matter of days now.
Definitely, everyone jumped on that straight away after the Thursday, interviews, and then everybody was on social media talking about how George Russell is moving to Mercedes. But make what you will of that. We'll only know once the official announcement comes through. But I'd be lying if I didn't say it just seems more and more likely that George Russell might be moving to Mercedes. But at least that Valtteri Bottas won't be at Mercedes for next year. It just seems more and more likely. But enough about Valtteri Bottas. Let's talk about his teammate Lewis Hamilton finally leading the World Championship by 6 points going into the summer break. Great stuff from him, but not the easiest race for Lewis Hamilton. Looked a bit dizzy, a bit shaken after the race. In the post-race interview, he did come out and say it was just fatigue, and he was still feeling the effects of COVID that he contracted last year. And he said on the podium he almost got dizzy and everything became a little bit of a blur, which is why he had to take a moment for himself and couldn't celebrate like he would have usually. So I hope he's feeling better, and I hope he recovers over the summer break and he's back to his peak physical fitness. But made the wrong call, Lewis Hamilton made the wrong call at the start of the race, for the restart. Although I think he was the only one who started in the top 10 who went unscathed except Esteban Ocon, during the first race start, and then after the red flag restart, made the wrong call, started on the inters, only person to start from the grid, and then had to come in and then basically went to the back of the pack, P14 absolutely, and then had to restart his race, basically, make his race recovery from there, from lap 2 onwards. But you got to give it to Mercedes. What a strategy masterstroke from them, after the blunder they made during the restart. That the two-stop strategy worked wonders and basically caught everyone off guard on the grid when they, pitted Lewis Hamilton on lap 20, the first person to pit, amongst the regular strategy, I guess. But definitely caught a lot of people off guard, especially Red Bull. Max Verstappen was ahead during that stint, but Red Bull reacted to Lewis Hamilton, and Lewis Hamilton undercut them during the first round of pit stops. Similarly with Daniel Ricciardo, McLaren tried to cover Lewis's pit stop with Danny Ric pitting the very next lap, but couldn't do so. Lewis Hamilton's outlap was just insane. That just goes to show, that how well Mercedes function and how much, why they are, a 7-time world championship winning team again and again. There's a lot of times, like we were talking in a couple podcasts before, that Mercedes have made multiple mistakes this season. We talked about Valtteri Bottas's, botched up pit stop, some strategy calls earlier in the season, but this just goes to show that both Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes have bounced back like they always do during the midway point of the season.
Absolutely. And obviously, even the biggest of teams make mistakes, as they have made over the course of the season so far. But it's races like these, and Spain, when they executed that two-stopper, it's races like these that just show you how smart Mercedes is. And they can outsmart everybody, and they deserve to be the 7-time defending world champions. But
absolutely, and the way Mercedes handled the situation, you would say that after the carnage that happened on lap 1, Red Bull were caught off guard, and they were on the back foot from there on. But even though Mercedes went on the back foot after what happened during the restart, making that bad strategy call regarding their tires, Mercedes came back and they took the race to the rest of the field instead of just sitting there and trying to react to what other people were doing, like most of the other teams like Red Bull, AlphaTauri and McLaren, who were ahead of them at that point of time. So that just goes to show what Mercedes are made of, and what Lewis Hamilton really do. On the second set of mediums that he had after the second round of pit stops, he had some blistering pace, about 2.5 seconds faster than anyone else on the grid at that time. But although he finished P3, he definitely got some, he was booed after qualifying, after his, I want to say after what he did, but after what happened in qualifying, because he completely, came out and said, hey, I didn't do anything on purpose, that was my pace during the last lap of qualifying, which is a little hard to buy for myself too, and just seemed that those were the tactics that he was, that was the games that he was playing on track at that point of time. I won't buy the fact that Lewis Hamilton's Q3, last quali lap was a second and a half slower than his first run in Q3, even if he did not do a great warm-up lap. And, the outlap itself was very, very, tactical in a way to say, getting, not allowing Max Verstappen to warm up his rubber, and then, keeping Max Verstappen in his wake the entire time during the flying lap, while also being slower during that lap. And I think a couple of drivers came out on social media, including Romain Grosjean, and said, that is just not sportsmanlike, or something along those lines, to which Lewis Hamilton said, I did my best on track and I don't know what you're talking about, or, these guys don't know what they're talking about, something along those lines. But again, I'm not going to buy the fact that Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton were not playing games with Red Bull during that last quali lap, but what are your thoughts on it?
Well, obviously there were games, and Lewis Hamilton was slower in the pit lane itself. When they were going for that final run.
Absolutely.
So he was slow in the pit lane itself. Max Verstappen managed to start his lap, but Sergio Perez couldn't. It's like what happened to Lewis Hamilton back in 2007 when Fernando Alonso didn't allow him to make that lap. So I think he was just playing it back But I agree with you. It was not. I mean, it was on purpose, and obviously the booing and the abuse was not right, and we don't.
I think it was uncalled for because I get the fact that people did not like what Lewis Hamilton did. I personally thought it wasn't like a great way to get P1. I would have loved to see Max Verstappen challenge for P1 in that last flying lap. But like Christian Horner said in the post quali press conference when Toto Wolff and Christian Horner were sat down together and they were asked about questions about Silverstone and the qualifying itself, and Christian Horner said that hey. It's just tactics. It's a part of the game. It's a part of the sport. So no hard feelings there. If we were in the same position, we might have done the same thing. So that just goes to show that no respect has been lost, and both teams understand that this is just a part of the game. And as much as fans don't like it, I don't think booing was really the way to go to be disrespectful or whatever the fans were trying to convey.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm glad that Christian Horner has taken a step down and calmed himself, because he was hyped up after Silverstone, even in that the review that he called for Hamilton's penalty. The evidence that they provided was not treated as sufficient by the stewards, and it was.
Red Bull did go over the top with getting Alex Albon in the car and trying to recreate the lines that Lewis Hamilton took during the incident with Verstappen and otherwise, which is a bit too far. And FIA came out and said that the evidence was not discovered but rather created in a sense, and that was not acceptable.
Yeah, so
which is kind of goofy in my opinion. A little bit too far.
Yeah, exactly my point. Those are not the things we expect from these teams and these championship winning teams. But I'm glad that Christian Horner has calmed down a bit, and hopefully this summer break and the added motivation to come back and fight harder will bring out the best in him. That was not the best in him.
Absolutely. But I was surprised that they went after Lewis Hamilton. I thought they were going to go after Mercedes in general and ask for either like a financial compensation or like a reduction in budget for Mercedes, given how much damage the damages that was caused to Max Verstappen's car, and some sort of penalty regarding power unit usage and things like that, because we'll talk about this later, but Max Verstappen was on his third power unit going into the race this weekend. They swapped out the power unit again after Honda discovered some issues with the PU after qualifying. So going into the race, Max Verstappen essentially used his third power unit for the year. But just to stir the pot a little bit before we close out our discussion on Mercedes. After today's incident, Bottas got a 5-place grid penalty for Spa and 2 penalty points on his on his license basically. But Lewis Hamilton after last weekend incident got only a 10-second time penalty and no penalty points on his license, which is really, really surprising, because we remember Lando Norris and Sergio Perez got the same penalty points. Not as much of a penalty in terms of a grid penalty or time penalty. Time penalty was the same as what Lewis Hamilton got, but they did get penalty points on their license after the incidents in Austria. But Lewis Hamilton did not get any of that, and I think there are a lot of fans asking about that right now, and even going into the weekend, I think there was conversation about it.
Yeah, well, as we have said over and over again, FIA have been consistently inconsistent this season. Obviously, the incidents were quite different. The conditions today were quite different. So, obviously we can't compare them apples to apples. But I guess.
But the thing is, like, the same article, the same rules and regulations were quoted by the FIA in their documents for all of the incidents throughout those 3 race weekends. So why is there a difference in the way the penalties have been given out? I guess the severity of the penalty in terms of grid penalties and time penalties can be understood based on the severity of the incident and how much in control and not in control, the severity of the way the drivers, made that error basically, or how much of an error it was, forced or unforced. But on the same hand, regarding the penalty points on the license, I believe Lewis Hamilton should have had a couple penalty points on his license, especially since the stewards deemed that it was more of his mistake and penalized him for the same thing that weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but then again, as I said, we have seen the inconsistency over and over again. I don't know what it is that causes it. Obviously, the stewards change every race weekend. The driver stewards change every race weekend. So it may be something regarding that. But as we have discussed earlier, FIA needs to be more consistent in that in their penalties, because once they are consistent, everyone will accept those penalties, and as long as they are inconsistent, people will continue to challenge all the penalties they get.
Absolutely, but you gotta give it to Hamilton too. This man definitely does get a little more lucky than all his competitors every season. And so far this season, he has definitely been more lucky than Max Verstappen, who's had a string of bad luck. First in Baku, then last weekend, and once again today after his shunt with Valtteri Bottas. Finishing P10, so salvaging 1 point at the end of the day. Not much for Red Bull either, since Perez also got, DNF'd after the very first lap, first corner incident. But Perez also talked about damage to his engine after the first lap incident, so Red Bull should be really worried about all the damage, not just in terms of cost, but in terms of penalty going into the second half of the season. Because like we talked earlier, Verstappen is on his third engine basically. He might be able to use his second PU again that he didn't use into this race weekend. But if Perez is already into, his third, some of his components are the third iteration, the third unit going into Belgium and Italy, that might not bode well for the end of the season for Red Bull, and when the championship is at its very peak.
Yeah, absolutely. The penalties for the components on one hand, and especially for this season, I think the impact on the cost cap is even greater than the impacts that those penalties bring, in my opinion. But it's just bad. I mean, not just Max Verstappen. Red Bull in their all have been more unlucky than Mercedes.
Absolutely, but both Mercedes and Red Bull will be pushing the upper limit of the cost cap as we get towards the end of the season. However, the only thing I would say that I really liked from this weekend in terms of Red Bull and Mercedes was that Max and Lewis still share the mutual respect. We saw them fist bumping after the qualifying session, even though Max finished only P3 after the games that Lewis played and Mercedes played out on track during the end of that session. But yeah, great to see Max shutting down all the reporters and the social media people who were asking him about the shunt from last weekend, and he just said he's had enough of it and it's time to move on. And he's moved on and he's looking forward, and it's really good to see Max be in that calm frame of mind, being really mature and in a way acting like a world champion, just looking ahead and concentrating on the task at hand and what needs to be done in order to win this championship.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the mutual respect between the championship contenders is very important, because in 2016 we saw, even like they were teammates, Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton, and even then the mutual respect was almost close to zero, right? And
absolutely, and we were talking about after last week we were talking about how the game is on, how this is the breaking point in the season, but it doesn't look like it. Seems like Max and Lewis are still on the same page. They're not fighting each other, and they're still they might play whatever games they might play on track, but off the track they still share the same respect for each other as they did before the Silverstone weekend.
Well, Toto and Christian are fighting each other more than Max and Lewis. So yeah.
We've all seen, Christian and Toto have a flair for the dramatic a little bit, especially through all the Netflix Drive to Survive seasons, and what we've seen especially from Christian Horner, when with everything that happened with Renault a couple years ago.
Yeah.
So we all know that he's got a little. All of the team principals have a little bit of flair for the dramatic, but enough for the top of the championship. Enough talk about Mercedes and Red Bull. Mercedes are definitely leading the constructors by 10 points. Lewis leading Max by 6 points. Let's talk about the P3 fight in the championship. Ferrari and McLaren. McLaren coming away with absolutely no points this weekend. and Ferrari coming away with a good haul of points thanks to Carlos Sainz. I think 10 points and closing
12.
closing the gap to 12 points and closing the gap to McLaren to just 3 points. Ferrari sit at 160, whereas McLaren at 163. You were talking about the championship is on. I think this is much closer than anyone else. Leclerc obviously DNF'd, just being a passenger in that shunt with Lance Stroll. Although Lance Stroll did try to take avoiding action, and as a result, he tried to avoid crashing into Ocon, who was eventually the race winner today, but couldn't do well enough to also avoid Charles Leclerc on the inside of turn 1. But great race from Sainz. Carlos Sainz didn't just drive a great race. He was also his own strategist, and he was more on top of things than his race engineers, as we've seen from the good old days with Seb and Ferrari, where Seb was also in charge of his race strategy.
Well, Carlos Sainz did replace Sebastian Vettel, so the responsibilities come with the seat, right? But
absolutely.
I mean, Carlos Sainz had the pace. He made up quite a few places in the initial start with all the front runners crashing out basically, and the restart, obviously and the subsequent pit stops.
He lost a few places in the pits, and then he got stuck behind Yuki Tsunoda and especially Nicholas Latifi
exactly
for the first 20-25 laps, and that really cost him lap time, which he could have made. He could have probably been on the back of Sebastian Vettel and Esteban Ocon throughout his first stint, which would have helped him a lot towards the end of the race. But obviously that was not the case. However, I guess the question that comes out of Carlos Sainz's race this weekend was, could Carlos Sainz have finished P3 had he undercut or overcut Hamilton? Responded to Hamilton's second pit stop. What do you think about that? Because obviously after the in the post race interview, Carlos talked about how Lewis pushed him after the first round of pit stops. And he didn't have tires left towards the end of the race, which is why he couldn't really fight Lewis Hamilton when he eventually passed Fernando Alonso, and he was also saving a lot of fuel because of his battle with Lewis Hamilton during the middle stages of the race.
Well, definitely, and I mean, had the race gone on for a few more laps, even 2 more laps, even Fernando Alonso could have overtaken Carlos Sainz, because he was within the 1 second.
Half a second.
Exactly.
Yep.
So definitely he could have played that 2-stop strategy game, because they had seen that Lewis Hamilton was playing it, and it could pay off.
See, I don't agree with you. I think Ferrari took the right decision to keep Carlos Sainz out there, because had Carlos Sainz split after Lewis Hamilton, I don't think there was a chance that Carlos would have overcut Lewis Hamilton anyway. He would have come out behind Lewis Hamilton, and he would have to race both Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso to get P3. But had Carlos Sainz also undercut Lewis Hamilton and had stayed ahead of Lewis Hamilton, he would have still come out behind Fernando Alonso. And I don't think Carlos Sainz would have had the pace to overtake Fernando Alonso throughout the rest of the race, because Lewis Hamilton was a 2.5 seconds faster than Fernando Alonso, and still struggled for more than 10 laps before he could finally overtake Alonso. And he could only do that because Fernando Alonso made a mistake going to turn 1. He locked up his wheels, went wide, and that's why Lewis Hamilton was able to make that overtake. And I just don't think Carlos Sainz would have been in a position in that Ferrari he wouldn't have had that pace advantage to overtake Fernando Alonso had he made that pit stop. So I think that was a great call from Ferrari to keep Carlos Sainz on the same set of tires, not make him pit again, and hope for the best towards the end of the race.
I mean, see, after crashing out in Q2, finishing P4 is a great result in itself, right? And we are talking about battles, championship battles. The intra-Ferrari teammate battle is net zero right now. Both of them are at 80 points. So this is another battle to look out for, in a way, because while Charles Leclerc has been the faster of the two, he has been more inconsistent and rather unlucky. And Carlos Sainz has been, picking up points every race. So 80 all. Let's see what goes ahead.
Absolutely. But again, disappointing weekend for McLaren. No points. Daniel Ricciardo did was running in the point for the majority of the race, but lost out to Max Verstappen towards the very end. Now, obviously, people have come out and said, that this was a disappointing weekend for Daniel. He didn't perform as well as we thought, especially after that weekend in Silverstone. But in my opinion, this is where Daniel Ricciardo is. People in Silverstone thought, again, I'll make the same argument again that I made after Barcelona. Although I did say after Silverstone that it seems like Daniel Ricciardo has made a step in the right direction. And I think that step was still visible because his race pace was on par. He was keeping up with the cars ahead of him. And there was nothing more he could do because the McLaren doesn't have enough pace in it against, AlphaTauris and Ferraris or any of those other teams to be able to overtake around Hungary. Whereas Max, even with the damaged car, apparently had enough pace towards the end of the race. So I think Daniel did all he could. Maybe he could have defended for that last point a little harder. But I think that was the weekend we could have expected. Definitely in qualifying he could get, do a little bit more work. But other than that, I think Daniel Ricciardo performed what I expected out of him. He didn't over-deliver, he didn't under-deliver, at least for me. So I wouldn't say that, that Daniel Ricciardo didn't make a step. I wouldn't say that Daniel Ricciardo didn't make a step in Silverstone.
Well, I mean, definitely the race was quite good because he was defending Max Verstappen for a majority of the race. Eventually he lost out, but he was still right there. And he knows that he needs to work on qualifying because that's where he lacks throughout the season. So, like summer break, refresh your batteries. We have Spa and Monza. Again, 2 circuits the drivers know very well. So, Hungary was one of the trickiest circuits on the calendar, right? Spa and Monza are not as tricky. And it might be easier for Daniel to again
get into the
groove right,
and find some pace. Absolutely. And that is the championship battle for P3 in the Constructors Championship. Now let's talk about P5. We going into the Hungarian GP, in a Hungarian GP preview, we said that Alpine look like the best team to finish P5 this season, and they're already P5 in the championship by 9 points. They're sitting at 75 points. Alpine 9 points ahead of Aston Martin and 11 points ahead of AlphaTauri. Even before I talk about Esteban Ocon's win and how emotional and how what a storyline that is, let's talk about the defensive masterclass that Fernando Alonso put on today for the world to see. I mean, I was just speechless. Like, I was on the edge of my seat for 20 laps watching Fernando Alonso defend from Lewis Hamilton, and it was, for some reason, it was really painful to see Fernando Alonso make that mistake and let Lewis Hamilton through. I just didn't want that to happen at all. It was more painful than watching Lewis Hamilton overtake Carlos Sainz. But man, what a show from Fernando Alonso, and you have to give it to that guy. I wouldn't say that Esteban Ocon's win is because of Fernando Alonso, but a part of it, he's got to give credit to Fernando Alonso and the defensive driving show that he put on to make sure that Esteban could get home without having to battle Lewis Hamilton for the win.
I mean, I was beaming for 15 laps, and when Hamilton overtook Fernando, I was a little sad, but I mean, it was just the level of effort and commitment Fernando put in, because he knew fighting for P4 at the moment, and that was his best result in this season, and that was Alpine's best result in a long while, including Renault. So absolutely mesmerizing,
absolutely scintillating from Fernando Alonso. And I think people, obviously, like, I was one of the skeptics when Fernando Alonso came back, and I'm back on the Fernando Alonso hype train. But I think for those who weren't watching Formula 1 when Fernando Alonso was at the top of his game, whether that was back in 05, 06 or during his years at Ferrari, and especially for youngsters who have started watching Formula 1 now, teenagers, this is what Fernando Alonso was. And I think it's a great opportunity for them to see what a two-time world champion, why Fernando Alonso, although he's only a two-time world champion, is regarded still so highly, maybe even over Sebastian Vettel by a lot of people, and on par with, the greatest that there have been in Formula One. It just goes to show how insane a racing driver Fernando Alonso is in general. And I texted you during the race that I think we just have to wait for Fernando Alonso to write a book on how to defend from Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes, so that the rest of the grid can read that and hopefully, give Lewis a harder time on track. But definitely insane. Now let's talk about Esteban Ocon. I think, this is one of those milestones in his journey. Obviously, every driver remembers their first win, but Esteban Ocon, he's not your usual F1 driver. He's got a huge, his story is really, really heartwarming in general. The way he has been sacrificed for him to come to Formula One and for him to finally win his first Formula One race, it's just awesome, And there's not much you can say about it. Esteban Ocon's last win came in GP3 in 2015, so it's been 6 years since his last win. And Esteban Ocon also became the first French driver to win for a French team with a French engine after Alain Prost. So, and unfortunately, Alain Prost was not there with the Alpine team there this weekend. And he also gave Renault Group their first victory in Formula One ever since their return during the turbo hybrid era. But what an emotional day. Reminds me of the first time Gasly won his first F1 Grand Prix last year. And, similar such instances when Charles Leclerc won a couple years ago and everything alike. But, oh my God, the scenes for him at Hungary and for the Alpine team, just so emotional and heartwarming.
I mean, the journey of Alpine and Renault in this era has been too long, and we saw Cyril Abiteboul, depart Renault because they couldn't achieve what they were planning to, what they hoped for, and they have finally got that race win. Obviously, it's in, strange circumstances, but we can't take that away from them. They had the car, they had the pace, they had the driver, and
I mean, Seb was on it for one mistake from Esteban, and he could have lost the win to Seb pretty easily. Seb was on Esteban's rear wing for the entirety of the 70 laps that he was out there, and there was no respite for Esteban from the pressure that Seb was putting on him. So it was a scintillating drive out in front from Esteban. The way he led the race, the way he managed his pace, the way he managed tires, and the way he defended from Sebastian Vettel whenever he put a charge on. So that was great to watch from Esteban, and we've never really seen Esteban in the lead. We saw Esteban finish second last year, I think, or third.
In Sakhir.
I think third when Sergio won.
Yep.
Second or third when Sergio won, or something like that. And, but we've never seen him lead from the front, and that just goes to show. And I think there was some comment from the Alpine CEO, there were rumors of some comment that Alpine CEO came out and said before the weekend that Esteban Ocon might not be world champion material, and I think the win couldn't have come at a better time for Esteban Ocon going into the summer break, shutting up all his critics, especially after the, bad string of races he had at the French and Austrian GP, and after he, especially after he slipped down the points compared to his teammate Fernando Alonso. So, great stuff. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, his story is inspiring, and I was a Sergio Perez fan in their, the Racing Point days. So I didn't quite like Esteban Ocon at that time, but I was happy, and I mean, I couldn't believe myself that I was happy with Esteban Ocon winning a Grand Prix. But absolutely a brilliant drive from Esteban, because Sebastian, when you have a 4-time world champion behind you, a recharged 4-time world champion, I shall say, and he's pressuring you, he's within a second and a half throughout the race, you can't put a foot wrong. And Esteban Ocon did just that. He did not put a foot wrong, and I mean, he just showed you that he deserves his place and he deserves that 3-year extension that he got at Alpine.
Absolutely, and I think there was a nice post from Mercedes that said, we always believed in you, champ. Referring to Esteban Ocon and his win today. So that was really nice to see too. But Esteban Ocon leads Fernando Alonso in the Drivers' Championship by 3 points going into the summer break. So take that, Vedant.
Yeah, man. He has a win. He has a win.
But this was definitely a team effort today from Alpine, and it was great to see, Fernando wait for Esteban.
Yes.
Esteban obviously parked his car, at the end of the pit lane, having gone around twice. And Esteban was running back to the podium. So all the scenes with Seb also running from the other side of the pit lane to the podium.
It was so heartwarming because we could see Esteban hug almost every Alpine team member, right? And he made it a point to acknowledge everybody, and obviously Fernando waited for him while he was hugging everybody. So definitely a great team environment there.
Yeah, and I think in the post-race interview, Esteban also said that a lot of people told him a lot of things about Fernando Alonso when Fernando Alonso joined the team, and all of those things were wrong about Fernando Alonso. So definitely a great. And he called him and Fernando one of the best duos that were in the making right now. So obviously it goes to show how strong a partnership both of them share in that Alpine team, and I hope that partnership progresses. And going in 2022, we'd all love to see everyone at the top of the grid, competing like we see in Formula E, basically with a different winner every weekend.
Yep.
So hopefully we can see that happen. But now let's talk about P6 in the championship. Aston Martin, Vettel drove brilliantly once again throughout the entire race. But I'd say that slow pit stop definitely cost him a chance at the win. His outlap was brilliant when Esteban Ocon came out of the pits. Vettel was less than a second behind Esteban and did give him a run for his money through turns 1 to 4. But had Seb not had a slow pit stop like he did, about I think it was like 3.3 seconds. Had it been like 2.6, 2.5 second pit stop, Seb would have definitely had a better chance to take the lead of the race after the first round of pit stops. So definitely a little bit disappointing for Seb. But, Seb's been in the news for all good things, and just happy for Seb in general.
Yeah, I mean, the environment of that Aston Martin team just reflects, Seb's temperament right now. And he is rejuvenated, he is recharged, he has new goals right now. And this is his second podium of the season, if I'm not wrong. And
right.
It just shows you that, Seb Vettel is back where he belongs. The car might not be there, but Seb Vettel is right there.
Absolutely. I think it was Christian Horner that said when Seb's move to Aston Martin was announced that Seb will do well there because Seb likes the British way of going racing.
Yeah.
And that might just be it. But definitely, when Seb came onto the Aston Martin team, he didn't have great results in the first 4-5 races. But he's definitely bounced back and picked up the pieces whenever he has been able to, whether that was Monaco, whether that was Baku, or whether that was Hungary this weekend. And we hope to see Seb doing the same thing. Although I will go out on a limb and say uncharacteristic mistake from a maestro in wet, Lance Stroll. Usually he's really good in the wet, very controlled. We've seen him lead, I think, last year in Turkey in wet conditions.
Yes.
But really uncharacteristic mistake from Lance Stroll. Yeah. Absolutely. Very uncharacteristic mistake from Lance Stroll going to turn 1 today and crashing into, I think, Charles Leclerc and Daniel Ricciardo, I think. So, really disappointing for him, but hopefully he'll bounce back. We've seen Lance Stroll not bounce back from such incidents before, but hopefully, that will not be the case after the summer break. Obviously, just like Valtteri Bottas, he does have the 5th-place grid penalty in Spa and 2 penalty points on his license, but a lot more to come from Aston Martin. They did show great pace in Hungary though, so I'm really happy about that.
Definitely. And I mean, Lance Stroll is, people do question Lance Stroll, but he has shown that he deserves to be in Formula 1, and it's just a matter of time that, he has his performances and he has his downs, so it's just a matter of not staying down too long, as you said.
Absolutely, but overall a good weekend for AlphaTauri, who were just 2 points behind Aston Martin. Points for both, Pierre Gasly and Yuki Tsunoda. Good to see Yuki Tsunoda have a decent weekend. Definitely did not have qualifying go his way, but I think he kept it together during the race, and that is what we want to see from Red Bull Junior. In the future, and I think Yuki Tsunoda is doing all the right things at the moment. Just needs to get more weekends together overall, in general. And Pierre Gasly definitely showed the pace that car has this weekend once again. But the good news, I think, the overall good news is that AlphaTauri had a double points finish, and I think that is what they need every weekend in order to fight for that P5 place in the Constructors' Championship, because at the moment Alpine are running away with it in a way, because they came behind from 29 points a couple of weekends ago to be at 75 points in a matter of couple of weekends, and be in that P5 position in the Constructors' Championship, something that AlphaTauri had been occupying for the first 8-9 rounds of the season.
Yeah, definitely. We now have these blocks of championship contentions, and while the top two are the most competitive, this fight for P5 is way more important for these teams, because the prize money that comes with it is way more important for these teams right now. And everyone, even few points make a huge difference. So
absolutely,
definitely.
But let's talk about the new P8 team in the Constructors' Championship, Williams Racing. Double points finish for Williams, like I said before. 735 days since their last point scored. This will be an emotional weekend for all of the Williams employees who've been on this journey in the turbo hybrid era. We've all seen them struggle, but finally some points for them this weekend. George Russell got emotional and teary-eyed in his post-race interview, which just goes to show how much the Williams team means to him in general. A lot of times people dismiss George Russell as someone who's just looking to make that next step to Mercedes, who doesn't really care about Williams team in general. But today's reactions during the post-race interview just goes to show how much the Williams team means to George Russell, and how much scoring points for the Williams team in 3 years, for the first time in 3 years, means to him. And just very emotional. Nicholas Latifi obviously finishing in front of George, something that was quite unexpected. And another heartwarming message from George during the race that, hey guys, since Latifi was running P3 at that point, George Russell came on the radio and said that if we have to compromise my race in order to finish in the points, and have Nicholas do that for us, I will be happy to compromise my race and make the sacrifice that is required to get home some points for the team. So really, really heartwarming to see that from George Russell too. But again, that was not all. George Russell did make a cheeky move at the restart in the pits, where he jumped from like P7 to P2 because of the way the Williams, where the Williams pit box is positioned, that allowed him to jump. But again, the race control came in and said, hey, you have to give back all the positions you made up during the restart, and you have to draw back to P7 and then continue your race from there. But overall, massive weekend for Williams, and I couldn't be happier for them.
Well, definitely. Nicholas Latifi holding on to all those people charging on from behind. That would have been a massive confidence boost for him, because even his place in Williams is not secure right now, and every single piece of performance and result just makes that decision more convincing. But George Russell, he has put in so much for this team. 3 years, finally getting those points, and it's almost ironic, because Hungary was the first time in this season where he didn't make it to Q2, right?
Yes.
And
absolutely.
Then finishing in points. So absolutely a brilliant weekend.
George defended from everyone behind him beautifully throughout the race. Whether it was Daniel Ricciardo, whether it was Max Verstappen, he always had someone on his tail for the entirety of the race, and he still managed to finish P9. And similarly for Nicholas Latifi, like you said, I think I texted you that Latifi was a wall in the race.
Yeah.
Holding up Yuki Tsunoda, holding up not Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, holding up Fernando Alonso, and basically allowing Esteban Ocon and Seb Vettel to
run away. Exactly.
make a gap, run away with the race. But Nicholas Latifi did all he could, and again, it goes to show that I think a lot of people have come out and said in support of Nicholas Latifi even before that on race pace, Latifi is pretty close to George Russell, but it is the qualifying that he can't get together, and I think that just goes to show again today that that is where the issue lies. And once Nicholas Latifi can get his qualifying together, we might see a very good contender in him for it. Contender in him in F1 just in general for the future. Hard to say he'll be a world champion, but definitely, maybe someone like Lance Stroll or someone who can get points for his team consistently throughout the course of the season.
Absolutely. And another meme-worthy incident, where, as you mentioned, when George Russell said that, "Hey, I'll be willing to compromise my race." So a lot of people on the internet just said, "See, this was a message to Toto that hey, I'm a team player. This is my advertising for a team player." So, yeah.
I don't know about that, but on that note, I was about to stir the pot when we were talking about Alpine, and Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton. It was kind of funny, I guess, listening to Lewis Hamilton complain about aggressive defensive driving at high speeds, especially after his incident last weekend. Just something for the listeners, something with the social media. Make what you will of that. Meme it, boo, whatever you want to do. I'm not gonna tell you anything, but just for me, it was a little bit funny to hear Lewis complain about it, especially after he said, he's gonna put his foot down and whatnot. But just something, just a little bit. But coming back to the agenda at hand, great weekend for Williams. We hope to see them score points again throughout the course of the season. But the 5-point lead over the 4-point lead over Alfa Romeo should be enough for the rest of the season, in my opinion, unless we have a race like we did today. Alfa Romeo definitely missed out on some point scoring opportunities today after getting penalties for unsafe release for both their drivers. Kind of absurd, but I guess they were just not on the game today. Could have been a point scoring race for them, but definitely gave it away to the Williams team.
Yeah, I think Kimi Raikkonen did finish P11, right? So, had he not had that 10-second penalty, there was potential to score a couple of points maybe.
Yeah, and not just that, I think they also had issues with their pit stops for both Kimi and Giovinazzi. They had a slow stop for, I think, front left for Kimi or something.
Yeah.
It's hard to recall right now, but they did have some issues there. And the last team on the grid, Haas. Mazepin, DNF, nothing much to talk about there. But Schumacher ran in the points for quite a while, and he did put up a good fight against Lewis Hamilton and everyone else. Max Verstappen, and he fought them hard, tried to defend for the points. So great to see Mick there, but definitely I think he had a shunt this weekend in practice.
Yeah.
So again, not great for Haas, especially since even though they're not trying to spend money on development this year, it's just eating into their budget for next year. So hopefully Mick and Nikita will be able to keep that together and not lose a lot of, not have their team have to spend a lot more money on cars this season. That is something that they definitely, I think Mick's had 2 or 3 shunts this season already, and Nikita has had just as many as Mick almost. If I maybe a couple less, but definitely a lot of money going into parts production for this year for the Haas team. Anything else regarding this weekend from your side, Vedant?
Well, no, it was a fun weekend. It was after Saturday, no one expected rain, and no one expected it to be no one expected the race to be so dramatic, and we are all happy that it was dramatic because we saw Esteban Ocon win, we saw Fernando Alonso defend against Lewis Hamilton, and Williams in points. So a lot of great storylines coming out of Hungary. It's a 4-week break now, 3-week break. So we'll
let's just not talk about that break right now.
Yeah,
it's kind of depressing to not have Formula 1 for 4 weeks straight. But a lot of content coming out from our side, and hopefully a lot of news and stories coming out from the F1 paddock over the course of the next month. Silly season is on. And just a little rules and regulations update here. We were supposed to have the pit stop rules and regulations, the new ones, enforced in during the Hungarian GP, but that had been pushed back to the Belgian GP. So we'll see those new pit stop rules and regulations come into play when the teams return in Spa in a month's time. So that'll be interesting to see how the teams cope with those new rules and regulations that we couldn't see this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's all from my side.
Absolutely, I just can't wait for Spa and Monza. Those are two of my favorite races on the calendar every year, and this 1 month is going to be the longest 1 month of this year. Like I said before, multiple times. But that doesn't mean that it isn't motorsport throughout the next month or so. We have the Formula E
Season finale.
let's say season finale. Yes, season finale. I was trying to think of a word. We have the Formula E season finale next weekend, so stay tuned for that. And we have IndyCar coming back in 2 weeks. The IndyCar season is coming to a close. It will be the first Music City Grand Prix in Nashville, Tennessee. So big event for IndyCar there. So stay tuned for that too.
And we also have the 24 hours of Le Mans coming up in August, I believe.
In 3 weeks, yeah.
Yeah, so it's, I mean,
I think it's in 3 weeks.
It's around that time only. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So a lot of racing, during the F1 summer break. But before we wrap up this podcast, we wish a speedy recovery to Jack Aitken and David Aragon as they were involved in a massive crash at the 24 Hours of Spa. Kevin Estre and Frank Pereira, who were also involved, but were cleared by the on-site medical center. And our thoughts are also with the marshal and his family. The marshal who lost his life in a crash at Brands Hatch. The marshals are underrated heroes of the racing world. They are the ones who allow us to go racing every weekend. And without the marshals, it would be impossible to, have a safe racing environment every weekend for all of us racing fans. So our thoughts are with the marshal and his families. So right before we close, Vedant, just one last question. So a lot of drivers, and I especially saw this post from Callum Eilert, and they've been calling for changes to the Radio Eau Rouge corner complex to Spa. Now that corner complex has been an iconic part of motorsport, not just Formula One, motorsport in general. But we have definitely seen a lot of close calls and a lot of horrendous crashes at that particular corner over the last couple of years. So what are your thoughts on it? We obviously lost Antoine Hubert. In that corner complex, we almost had quite a few bad crashes previously. I'm not able to recall the name. And now this crash with Jack Aitken and David Aragon in that same corner complex. So what are your thoughts, Vedant?
Well, see, it's one of the most iconic corners in Formula One, as you said. In motorsports itself, as you said. And I mean, any drastic changes would obviously upset a lot of fans. I believe there was a previous iteration of the layout which was not as fast, and it went a little left and it was a slower section basically. So I would be happy if that came back, and if they were to make any changes. But I think it's more to do with today's cars and the amount of downforce that we have in today's cars, not only Formula 1 but every other series, because in Formula 1 Eau Rouge is almost flat out. The Radio Eau Rouge section is almost flat out. In Le Mans and in WEC prototype racing, in GT racing, the level of aerodynamic capability in these cars is too high, and this corner is a historic corner from ages ago. So I think that is the balance here, and obviously these drivers want to go as fast as they can.
Safety comes first.
I mean,
so whatever
that
we
is
can
risky.
do to make racing safer, without damaging the quality of racing. But obviously we don't. If this corner has become too dangerous, because we've seen changes made to tracks like Imola over the years because of dangerous corners. So this won't be the first time that this will be happening. But if that is what is required to
true.
make racing safer at Spa, then so be it. Let's make those changes. Let's make racing safer so we can go racing more often without as much of a worry about major accidents like these. But yeah, any other thoughts from you, Vedant, before we close this podcast?
No, I mean, yeah, that's all from my side.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Vedant, for joining me once again here at Motorsport Baithak. It's almost been an hour since we started talking, and that's a long, long time. I think probably the longest podcast so far. So hopefully you had a great time, and to our listeners, stay tuned for more motorsport content. We will be talking about, we'll be reviewing the first half of the season. We will be talking about each of the teams in detail. We'll be talking about the silly season, and we will definitely be covering the Formula E season finale and in some of IndyCar and WEC coming your way. So stay tuned for all the motorsport action on Motorsport Baithak. Thank you, and we'll catch you next week.